Welcome, everybody. Thanks very much for being with us and joining us today for Building Culture Through Competency-Based Professional Learning. As you can see, we have three guests. We have Margaret Weinstein, Divina Capellupo, and Noah Geisel. We're going to get to introducing y'all shortly, so thank you. I'd like to welcome everybody who's here on panelists, sponsors, and obviously guests. Thanks for joining us today. Please use the chat throughout to share questions, thoughts, ideas. We will respond to questions in the Q&A and ideally throughout. We'll jump in 1 second, but first a word from our sponsors. We have 3 sponsors for today's webinar. You can learn more about each of them and link through our learning page. Green Spoon Martyr, full service capabilities in over 20 offices in the US. Attorneys helping every kind of plant-touching company. Englewood Construction, national experience with high-end retail and secure industrial facilities. They are a practical choice for cannabis facility construction. And Green Rose Advisors, have a new cannabis license and need help with next steps? Green Rose Advisors stands ready to help you maximize your cannabis opportunity. And then, of course, Grown In is hosting this, and we provide news and education in the cannabis space. So thank you so much. Now let's get to it. Panelists, I'm going to invite you to introduce yourselves because you know yourselves better than I know you. So could we please start with Divina and then go Noah and followed by Margaux?
Yeah, absolutely. Hi, everyone. I am Divina Capellupo. I am the district manager for the Illinois market for the Verilife locations. I've been with the company for about 1.5 years now. Kind of been in retail pretty much 20 plus years. Interesting and fun to say that out loud and age myself a little bit. Yeah, and that's kind of me in a nutshell. I obviously am familiar with Grown In because they're our resource for kind of that continuous education platform for our dispensaries.
Hey everybody, I'm Noah Geisel. I'm the Micro-Credentials Program Manager at the University of Colorado Boulder. Most of my adult life prior to that was as a high school Spanish teacher. In 2013, I was the National Language Teacher of the Year, which was pretty awesome. And for the last 6-7 years, I've been working as a consultant in the digital badge and micro-credentialing space, and hopefully able to bring some of that perspective and lens to this conversation today.
And I'm Margaux Weinstein. I've been with PharmaCann since February of this year, joined Cannabis in February of 2019. Before that, I spent about 20 years in healthcare industries. Let's see. PharmaCann is headquartered out of Chicago, but we're a multi-state operator. And I'm happy to be here today. Looking forward to this discussion.
Thanks. So I invited specifically the 3 of you because I think that collectively we represent quite a range in terms of perspective and the way that this concept of competency-based learning, which is basically, if you think about doing anything in your life, like figure out what do you want to know, how do you demonstrate that you can do it, and then what are the things along the way that are going to help you get there. But we don't always think about professional learning that way, and certainly not compliance-based training. So I really want to kind of start with some general language and get everyone on the same page a little bit, because we do come from different perspectives and we have different daily concerns. So just from the kind of, Noah, I'd like to start with you on this a little bit more. What is the difference between compliance and competence? Are they mutually exclusive? Does one include another? Like, give us a little framework, and then Divina and Margaux, if you want to add in on that or how you see that up front, jump in, and then we'll roll to some other stuff.
That's a really interesting question. I guess, they can be related, but they could also be mutually exclusive, I guess. I think that, compliance is something that usually doesn't have a lot of buy-in. And so, but in certain places, especially a highly regulated industry, compliance is really important, and it overlaps with competencies so that you're doing things right, not just by your customers, but also by regulations. And so I think that they can overlap, but I also think that by focusing on competencies, you're really able to work into your training and possibly even your credentialing, stuff that actually matters, that helps people be successful within your organizations.
Yeah, and I mean, I would say, you know, for me, I kind of see compliance as like your operation manual, right? Like, especially in this industry, in the cannabis business, like if we're not compliant, we're not a business, right? At the end of the day. So when I think of that, and then I think of competency, competency is kind of how you see the information in front of you, and then how do you kind of implement that information, right? Just knowing the manual doesn't really get you very far. You have to have the ability to have those people in the business that have the competencies, and individuals who have the competencies to, you know, delegate or be able to be strategic about the information that's in front of you and be able to kind of execute that, and have that like almost, you know, the competency of situational awareness to be able to see kind of 20 steps ahead of the game of what's going to happen, in order to make sure that we are staying kind of compliant. So, you know, in one aspect, I think you need that kind of those competencies to drive that compliance piece, because it's really just kind of the manual in front of you at that point.
Yeah, and really just to build on what folks have said, and of course, I'm a compliance attorney, so to me, compliance is uber important. It's the most important. But really what I see is it's at minimum what an organization must do to stay out of hot water, right? So what I've said in past lives is really that's the floor for any organization to build a house. And most organizations want to strive to build a house to reach the ceiling. The ceiling includes additional components, but that's really what you need to do in order to stay afloat in whatever industry you're in. But it's not going to give you the trajectory that you need to grow and learn and build as an organization. So, but again, I'm biased.
Really, you may be biased, but we're all nodding. Noah and Divina, do you want to share anything in that loop as that's kind of gone around a little?
And just one thing to kind of build on Margaux's analogy of the house, you know, that's if we view compliance as just the foundation and the ground floor, you know, the inviting in competencies is kind of what makes your house stand out potentially, right? It's where your paint and your wallpaper and you know, your awesome, comfortable couch can start to come in. And you know, in my mind, it's a way to take your, you know, professional learning and growth curriculum that you have. It may be really kind of centering compliance, but by infusing competencies, you know, it also is an opportunity, I think, to bring culture into the curriculum and really make it, you know, what's special about your brand.
Absolutely. And I mean, I think at the end of the day too, it's the ability to kind of develop your people into something more than what, you know, is the kind of baseline, right? And so at the end of the day, like anybody can read what the rules and regulations are, but you know, how we kind of implement that in our day-to-day, and how do we really teach that to everybody that's walking in our stores to be that kind of like best brand, where there are no hiccups right in the road. And so I think that that's the biggest thing when it comes to like those competencies, and having the array of competencies within your organization too.
This is a great start. I'm saying this because I found myself for a second just like watching the webinar, like, oh yeah, I'm just taking notes on what y'all are saying, which reminds me to all the guests and folks, if you have any thoughts or questions, obviously these folks have experience with this sort of thing and have already made it relevant, so please share them in the chat. Let's maybe add a little bit of humor to what I think you've already demonstrated as a critical point. Kind of both through the anecdote, but also through the very clear delineation, which Divina, you said, kind of set the table with, I'll stay inside the house. We have an operations manual, but then how do you do it? How do you implement it? That's where these competencies are. And you named some really simple, like not simple to execute, but simple to understand. There's delegation, there's strategic use of info, there's situational awareness. These are all things that there are real competencies to be learned. So let's add some fun to our conversation for a second. And let's just think about some examples of where there maybe isn't a good enough baseline competency training, or where you wouldn't even necessarily think to train until you have a sequence of repeated errors or whatever it is. So where does the system get dirt in it? Which types of things do you see again and again? And we're not throwing anybody under the bus. We're actually trying to identify opportunities for building a better system.
Yeah, I mean, I'll start. I think for me, it's not necessarily even understanding kind of the opportunities in the operations or where the system, kind of takes a fault, right? It's really understanding what actually is needed in order to drive the success of that situation, right? Like I come from a world where if your operations aren't running 100%, it's the heartbeat of your store, right? Your back room is your heartbeat of your store. And if it's not running 100%, you might see success, but that success is limited for a certain period of time before, kind of the train, for lack of words, falls off the rail, right? And so like, when I think of coming into the cannabis business, with that mindset, I think of like even just something as simple as like vault organization, right? I think we kind of have the tendency to think, oh, well, the first thing I need to know is I need to have someone who has the competency of being able to organize the back room. And that's what's going to make me successful, right? Versus understanding kind of the talent that's needed to run that back room isn't just that organizational competency. It's really understanding like, okay, I have someone who is great at organizing, but at the same time, I need someone who knows how to analyze the business, needs to understand how to plan and kind of execute and understand that kind of have that foresight of understanding like I'm going to get X and Y and Z in, right? And this is what it's going to look like. How do I set the system up so that it's constantly flowing and not just that organizational piece? So I think for me, it's more about like really understanding what competencies are needed within the different areas of the business, and then figuring out who those people are that are going to be able to be successful in those roles.
That's cool. Margaux, do you want to add on that at this point, or you want to keep, where are you on that?
Well, and you mentioned something about sort of getting dirt in the gears and the how I sort of take that question too is what's missing in our cannabis industry, and what do we bring to the table as cannabis professionals, and what are we looking for, when we're operating. One of the neat things that happens is when I go to the dispensaries, I see customers and patients come and interact with our dispensary staff. And I absolutely love how interactive it can be. Some folks just want to come in, make their purchase and leave. But there are other folks who are very inquisitive about what are the specific strains that would be beneficial for my particular situation. It doesn't necessarily have to be a medical patient. Sometimes there are folks who are adult use customers who are also looking to interact with cannabis in a particular way. And our dispensary staff are really in tune with all of the different components of cannabis and the benefits, and carefully sort of help them through that process of selecting what is good for them. Of course, I've admitted that I come from a healthcare background, and I can't help but have that lens. I think one of the things that is missing in our industry in the US especially is some of that healthcare knowledge. We've been, it's very tricky to do any research. It's very tricky for companies and consumers to talk about their experience and their benefit and the benefits that they receive, because there's so many regulations around it. But really, our staff know how to walk through those conversations with our consumers, again, whether they're adult use consumers or patients. I don't know if that really speaks to what you're getting at. But
yeah, I think it does. I want to kind of tease that into a couple of like tracks for our audiences. When you think of, what I'll do is if you think about walking into a dispensary, from the moment someone's walking in, they're having a number of interactions with dispensary staff, right? There's when they arrive, they might even be in the parking lot. Then it's when they, walk in, there's ID, there's information, then they're with an agent, then there's, checkout at some point. They have all these different interactions. And the competency versus the compliance is everyone is already going to know all of these things that are required and what's acceptable, all of that. Let's assume that that's the compliance. The competency is going to be coming in terms of how do you impact that experience for the client or medical patient, right? And that becomes in terms of how well do you read this person? Are they a first timer? Have they been here multiple times? Are they an experienced user? Do they have something that they need to talk about in order to explain something? Are they looking at a new type of product or a new type of method of delivery? The ability for any employee to be able to listen, have empathy, connect the dots, make connections to product, understand how to expand somebody's understanding of the products, of the method of delivery, that's a lot of competence. Like, that's not easy. And when you think about going into many dispensaries, that may not always be the case. People may just know one part of that. So when I think about what y'all are describing in terms of the situation, I think Noah, going back to like why we're framing this as a competency thing, I think about, well, how do we want to strategically train for those things? Whether it's focused on a hospitality training and badging the hospitality skills that people are developing, or badging, listening skills where you're paying it, you're in different types of soft skill activities. So let's kind of move this for a second. And Noah, I'm gonna push this to you. I know I had talked to Margaux about, you just kind of got this already. Noah, I want to push this to you for a second and think about, like, are there formal or informal professional learning activities that you see showing up in the soft skill space and competencies that might not otherwise show up in compliance? So compliance training is easy to say, like, okay, here's the law, we're going to do that. Are you seeing soft skill, competency-based trainings that are emerging because the markets are demanding them?
Well, I know 100%. Yeah. And it's, not specific to any given industry. It's just, in this world of automation and outsourcing, there are still just inherently human tasks and skill sets and competencies. And a lot of those do tend to exist in that sort of 21st century skill, essential skill, soft skill, whatever you want to call it, kind of space. And, I was listening to Divina kind of riff on their topic. And, something that occurred to me is it's really about, so often we, see just an all-star worker and, we describe it as, well, what are they? They just have that je ne sais quoi, right? And what you were really hammering down on there is like, well, what if we didn't call it that? Like, what if we actually sat down and figured out, well, what is it that they have? And let's kind of backwards map to, okay, like those are competencies. Let's start to, seek ways that we can notice those, name those, and then seek to actually come up with systems for credentialing them, and I think a part of the credentialing is putting in place the professional learning opportunities so that, you're not just leaving it up to chance that they're going to acquire those skills, but actually creating conditions where you can upskill them if they don't already have those skills.
Let's
and
make
just
some
to go back to, sorry,
No,
Eric, what you were saying, compliance will get that customer in the door, the right person in the door, right? That meets the requirements, age, whatever it is, in the door. But that doesn't get them coming back, right? So that experience that they have interacting with those professionals is really what keeps them coming back.
I'm really glad you said that, because that's our sales pitch as someone who provides professional learning, because we feel like, I strongly feel, and this is my opinion, and I'll push back if you feel differently. I feel that it's a culture of learning that creates employee retention, employee growth, and customer loyalty. And if you're reducing churn in employee retention and reducing turnover for employees and reducing customer churn, you're able to focus on excellence as a company and really building, as opposed to constantly being at that ground level. I'm curious, as we talk about this, there was one of the questions we had kind of pre-talked about is competency, when you think about it through compliance and GM perspective, the concept of portability. So Noah, pregame, you had used the phrase trust in skills and habits which transfer. And obviously Divina and Margaux, you are deeply affected by that. So again, somebody can have an RVT badge. How do you believe in that? Right? Why? What is there? So let's kind of start there and get to that idea about portability and belief in skills and some of that. Anybody who feels most compelled can start with this.
Well, I don't mind taking the lead on this one. I'm not sure if this is what you're getting at, but with portability of skills, in my short career in cannabis, I've had to interact with over a dozen states in the cannabis industry with with regards to the regulations. And there's a lot of difference state by state. That can be the tricky part, but there are a lot of commonality as well. And if you can teach those particular aspects, you're likely going to see them in any state that you're at. In the end, regulators are trying to cover off on traceability of cannabis, diversion controls, securing facilities, regulations of marketing. Now, how they implement those things can differ from state to state, but really when you enter the cannabis industry, and even if you're just learning Illinois regulations to be compliant for your organization, you're going to carry over some of those skills into other states and within the cannabis industry. Is that sort of where you're looking at some of it?
Yeah, I mean, I think that to some extent, yes. I'm curious also. I mean, I think that there's, if we were to think about, nursing or education, right?
Sure.
Some states have reciprocity with other states, many don't,
Sure.
right? And so it's really complicated in the industry. In cannabis, clearly, there's no federal,
Right.
we don't have reciprocity nationally, but we are looking at best practices, and we
Yes.
are looking at, changes in practice, which will positively impact the industry at large because of the way that things are evolving, right? So, and you're looking at an emerging workforce, and a constantly evolving workforce, right? So portability, and transparency and kind of like faith in skills really does matter if you need to hire for things and be more flexible. Noah or Divina, when I'm kind of riffing there, what are you thinking about?
And I think that trust is just kind of one of the fundamental kind of concerns, in hiring and training and learning in our planet right now. And, in Margaux's case, as a lawyer, right, there's a bar exam in every state. And in some states, that bar has reciprocity with passing the bar in other states. And so that, because it's so well trusted, right? In other states, it's not transferable. And we see that in different industries, but also, in this day and age where, just the democratization of not just information, but learning opportunities, right? That, hey, everybody, come join me on Clubhouse or Instagram for my 5-part, series on how to get, be successful in the cannabis industry or something like that, and who's to trust me if I'm not, a state entity, if I'm not, a brand name 4-year university or something like that. And so, there's just this huge opportunity space right now in a lot of industries, cannabis included, to scale up learning opportunities that do have that trust, so that even if it's something that we're offering just to our employees, other companies trust that if our employees go to them, that, oh, they've been credentialed in these skills, especially some of these skills that beyond the compliance to some of those kind of human soft skills that you mentioned, Eric. I think that that's going to be huge in, I think, going back to culture, building up a workforce that really values their employer. And maybe they don't make those skills portable, because why would they want to leave the organization that's so well preparing them? But if they do, you also don't want to hold people back from the things that are going to improve their successful futures. So you're going to get the best out of them and make them even better while they're with you, but also prepare them for better impact in the industry as a whole when they do move on.
And I think for me, personally, I think of like, not only when do you get the person into the building, but like it starts with the interview process, right? And figuring out, again, I go back to like, what is the skills that your team is missing and how do you kind of hire for that miss, right? When I think of like, your guys' platform, Eric, Ronan, or any other organization that kind of has that like support to basically help foster these kind of competencies and these trainings, it's really taking what already is happening in the store and kind of just elevating it to the next level, right? And so if your team is missing someone who doesn't have that business acumen skill, it's kind of really interviewing for that and really asking those questions. And then when that person comes in, here are the tools, based on your organization or any other organization, to kind of help teach that business acumen to everybody else that's in the building, right? There's definitely people that kind of strive more than others in certain competencies, and they're just kind of self-taught in that, but they don't necessarily have kind of the skill to teach it. They just have that innate like skill themselves, that they somehow just kind of learned on their own. But kind of, I think that the portal part of it is how do you take what you already know and get that support you need to kind of teach it to everybody else that's in the building.
I think there probably are some organizations that feel threatened by providing their employees with maybe too much knowledge. Not that there really is a such thing, but when you invest in your employees, the return includes loyalty. So just like Noah is saying that they may take that knowledge elsewhere, oftentimes it comes with a whole host of things when you're investing in your employees, and they wind up sticking around. So
this was one of the other, we kind of got there organically. I want to talk specifically about the individual a little bit more. We've been looking at this very much from the corporate side or to the organizational side, but I will spend a little time on the individual. But first, I want to just catch what you just said, Divina, which is, I also think about this, even as a provider, I think about it the same way you do, which is you're the experts in your field. You know what you do well and what you need. And then the question is, how can a learning system inside of your organization sustain and accelerate that, right? As opposed to how do you contract expertise in your specific area of expertise? Like systems can save you time and energy, but really being able to be laser, because something saves you time and energy, it allows you to be even more laser focused on the areas that need growth. So that's kind of what I'm hearing. And when I think about the individual, like obviously, especially in these days, the actual, and in this industry, there's this interesting paradigm that's kind of evolved in this industry. We have a whole like access equity question, but I think about mobility as actually being something as like a higher form of empowerment. It's not just getting access, but I want you to be empowered, to be mobile. And so that means credentialed in a way that's trusted, so that you have reciprocity into another place, even if that reciprocity is simply, we value an employee who would have come from PharmaCann. Absolutely, we want to hire them, I think that there's really something in that. And when I think about this industry, it feels very, very important to me that people have a stamp, a digital badge that they can point to on their resume. They can have it on their social, especially because this is a more transitory workforce than even, a couple of generations before us. And because they want different things out of companies, and they expect to do different kinds of work, and they expect companies to reward them in different ways. So it does feel like when we think about the individual, there's something really empowering about credentialing. Noah, can I ask you to kind of speak to that a little as an expert in the field there?
And I think the access and equity piece is undeniable. That there's, I saw last year, there was a really interesting report out of the Philadelphia Federal Reserve Bank just around, skills and saying that a lot of our kind of entry level workforce demonstrates skills that are showing up in higher earning salary kind of jobs, but they don't have the credentials to actually access those jobs. And that too often employers are using, other imperfect proxies of getting there, like, formal education or experience. And so, the ability to credential your workforce and these skills that are going to help them reach more mid-level employment is, transformative kind of economic mobility of helping people literally, the next day have a chance to increase their earnings by up to 40%. And so, I think that stuff is huge. And I also think that, to Margaux's point of if you're taking care of people, you retain them, and it can also play into things that are going to help you be better internally and catch problems earlier. If you've identified those competencies, you're also able to intervene early when you see that there's needs for growth. And, maybe it's not about growth plan. Maybe it's actually, that you have this internal heat map through your credentialing system of who is already here that excels in these skills. And maybe you're creating kind of leadership opportunities for people on, kind of frontline employees to be able to mentor, coach, and upskill one another by, oh, hey, this person's struggling to skill, but this other person, can you take them under your wing and show them what they need to do in order to get credentialed in the skills that you've been credentialed in?
I love that concept of the internal heat map. It's something we talked about before. And I remember in the past, when I would run organizations, we would always do things where we would have, as a part of culture building and team building, we would do those things where, like, you build a list of what you're great at and what other people are great at, what you want to learn. And people are like, oh, I want to learn that from you. I want to learn that, and just opening up that cultural, that collaboration and culture. Divina, as you're kind of thinking about all of this, and you oversee many, many individuals with a range of different skills, what kind of, what do you look at in terms of like symptoms or trying to pay attention so that you can so you can get ahead of real problems? What are the kinds of flags that you look for?
I don't think I would say like flags as much as like, so it was funny because I think somebody asked me the other day, like, what makes someone successful in this industry, right? And I think that's the $1 million question, right? That's out there right now. And, I personally think kind of where we are in 2021, it's not back to what we were even in my retail days of, in 2007, right? People kind of how they access information, it's very immediate, right? Like they want, if they want to know what strain this does and what effects it gives, right? It's instantaneous. You could just Google it. And so I think when I think of, having that person in the building who is successful, it's really those people who know how to self-manage themselves, right? And so when I think of these like platforms for kind of the education piece and being able to, give that to our associates, it's really that accessibility of just having it and being able to kind of teach them and have them go through it and then say at the end, okay, like let's see what you process and what you learn from it, right? Because we don't interact anymore like we used to, right? Like there's the ability of having, it's not a paper training guide anymore that like we have to kind of update every 3 years. So, I mean, for me, I think that's probably the bigger thing is really understanding like, how do we have that accessibility for them to learn?
Noah or Margaux, do either of you want to add anything? Okay. I'm gonna welcome in a couple of our chat questions, and actually, I think Margaux, some of this points straight to you. How can executives help train dispensary staff to become more informed on the healthcare side of cannabis, especially in recreational markets? I have my own opinions about this question as well as I read it aloud. To you, please.
Let me make sure that I understand the question. So how can executives
it's in the chat at 114.
Train dispensary staff to become more informed on the healthcare side of cannabis? That's a tricky one. And it sort of, I think, melds in some of the comments that were last made as well. Being curious is going to be, I think, one of your greatest assets as you enter into the industry, whether you're trying to break in or whether you're already there, to maintain curiosity. And I think Divina can also point to that when her staff are curious, why is this a rule, or why do we do things the way we do things? And if they want to break into the industry, being curious about the cannabis industry, being, even starting their learning before they start their career in cannabis can show that initiative. How can executives help train? I think, making sure that they have the tools available to them to continue to be curious. Making sure that they don't exist in just a bubble. One of the things that we do at PharmaCann is make sure, even if you're, Divina will head up tours with her GMs and go to the cultivation and processing center to make sure that they are knowledgeable about the plant, about the processes that we do at PharmaCann as an MSO. And that also applies to our HR staff. HR goes to the cultivation centers. They are curious about what goes on at those centers, making sure that you have those things available to your staff, and then trusting the folks who are boots on the ground to lead that in the direction that is going to be best for their staff. So,
Divina, you want to add on to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think, for me, when I think about like what I've seen as success in Verilife and PharmaCann is, the kind of just the open communication between all the departments is kind of key. So, when I think of even being more informed on the healthcare side of the business, like, we are in multiple states, right? We have a DM that's a pharmacist as well and has that background, right? And being able to kind of collaborate with each other on our calls every week and say, hey, this is what's working, this is where we're missing things, and being able to then say, okay, like, what do we need to do to put things in place that will kind of support that education piece, and being able to kind of educate our associates and ourselves, right? At the end of the day, like, I'm still learning like anybody else, right? In the business, I know of cannabis, but like, even being able to Margaux's point, like being able to go and see it at a cultivation center is vastly different than what you probably, and anyone probably thinks of what cannabis has or has not been in the past. So.
And to all of that, I would add, I mean, so we're trying to respond to specifically to this kind of concern if we're hearing this from our clients who need this sort of training, looking at the market. So like, what I think about what we're trying to do to help solve this problem is we created a new course last year, which specifically kinds of blends more into that space. It's a cannabis care course. The intention is specifically to look at the body more, understand the endocannabinoid system in more depth, understand medicinal uses in more depth. It is a different type of training than a baseline compliance training, because that's not about the law. That's about the body. That's about the plant. That's about, that's much deeper. On the other hand, like, we have a HIPAA just for cannabis companies, because the use cases are completely unique in the cannabis industry. And there are so many opportunities for disclosure in breaches that are, unintended, and there's all sorts of problems in there. So I think what can executives do? They continue, I think what Margaux said, to continue to be curious and look for opportunities to provide their team with appropriate resources. And then I think, as Divina said, and to tie back to where Noah was going before, is like, there are soft skill trainings that we have to be aware of. There are keys to collaborating which are sustainable inside of organizations. There's that cross training and the shadowing and getting a sense of what's happening in other places and understanding the why between how the organization functions, so that each of us can go back into our small areas and do the things we need to do, play our roles. Let's look at this other question. This was at 12:31. Okay, Divina, I'm putting this to you. Are dispensary staff judged differently if they've taken one of the few, actually this is for both of you, college courses currently available on cannabis or external courses? If they haven't been credentialed, what do you look for interviewing? And obviously there's credentialing. This is probably worth explaining. What is interesting background training versus what is a credential that allows you to operate in the space. So let's just make that distinction for people.
Yeah, so I mean, I think, when I've seen it, come across the resumes that have come across my path, a lot of the credential training that I've seen is kind of the, responsible vendor training. That's all obviously something that's required by the state of Illinois, and kind of getting in front of that. People do take that before they even start with, companies and stuff like that, to kind of get a baseline of what is expected, even just coming into the cannabis business. I wouldn't personally say that I judge anyone differently. It's kind of interesting, I think, to be able to see who has had that training, and then how they kind of tie it back to what they want to do in the industry. I appreciate anybody who kind of has that ability to, like, say, I want to be in the cannabis business, and this is how serious I am about it, that I'm taking extra coursework, courses on it before I even start, right? So I think for me, it's more just like that ability to understand like that's where they're coming from. I think that there's such an array of people who come into the business and come in it for very, very vastly different reasons. Some of them come in it just because they've had experiences with cannabis and seen it from a medical perspective and how it's helped people in their lives or themselves. And then, you have people who just want to be in the industry because it's such a fast growing, interesting business to be in right now. So I wouldn't say I would kind of say that one's different than the other. I think more of a sense of like, I appreciate that somebody has kind of that ability to say, I'm going to take that on and, and go and do these courseworks and, do that extra training beforehand, even if I don't have the position as of yet.
Margaux, do you want to add anything there?
Really just what Divina is saying, that, it shows initiative and it shows a fire in their belly, which is a soft skill you can't teach.
I'll give a shout out to a scholarship fund in Chicago, Dana Murphy Scholarship Fund, which one of the categories of assessment when they look at young people is fire in the belly. So thanks for using that phrase and reminding me. Now we give a shout out to DMSF. Okay, so we're going to wrap shortly here. I wanted to take it big picture again and see, Noah, can you share any particular resources or places that you think people should go if they're intrigued to learn more about competency-based learning and professional learning, and why this matters and credentialing? Or if somebody's curious after this webinar, where are some places they might go? Yeah, cool. So, and John's thrown in any specific coursework training you've done for additional. And John, is your question directed to? So Noah, let's start with your question. John can clarify if he's asking Margaux and Divina.
Sure. I mean, I think a great first place in the industry is going to be trade groups and industry associations, because, they're not going to be so hyper specific to your workplace. And so, going back to that trust element, I think those are great starting places. I also think, selfishly, I'll put a plug, www.thebadgesummit.com. It's coming up at the end of this month, and it's free. It's a little 2-hour conference I'm organizing all about digital badges and micro-credentials with a focus on access and equity. And so that'll be a great place to kind of show up and see who else is playing in the space. And, I think that depending on what your use cases are, this has gone in just a few years from something that, people said, I've never heard of that, what is it, to, a whole lot of people have heard of it, to, in the next 2 years, we're going to see where, very few people are more than 1 degree of separation from earning digital credentials themselves or knowing somebody else who has. And so the information is only going to get more and more available, and would definitely encourage folks to check it out. I think that kind of on that frontline service worker, place, that one use case that I think is really interesting is some of the work happening at Walmart. Actually, it is a really fascinating place to look, and it's probably really easy to find on LinkedIn or any other place.
Great, thank you. We got a question from John. John, do any of you have a specific coursework training that any of you have done to gain additional cannabis knowledge? So yeah, if you want to shout out a couple of great resources, Margaux, you look like you want to give a shout out. Otherwise, we can we're going to list some
yours,
stuff,
of course, right?
Say that one more time, please.
Grown In obviously puts on. We vetted several different vendors and selected Grown In because, it was above and beyond, anything that we saw out there. So, but I don't know whether that's available to folks who aren't already in the industry. I'll let you speak to that, but it's what I recommend immediately to folks when they come into the industry and don't have knowledge about the cannabis space. So.
Divina, do you have anything other than thoughts there? I mean, you're faced with all sorts of questions every day.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think, like I said, I think I appreciate like coming into the business, and being in the first kind of 6 months of the business and kind of having that Margaux coming in and partnering with you guys and being able to kind of have that one-stop shop, right? I think that that's kind of the biggest thing that we need as we continue to grow at a rapid pace, as the cannabis business continues to grow at a rapid pace, is that kind of understanding of having that one-stop shop where we're not having to search for information in every which way and not being able then to actually implement any type of conversations or teach anyone anything, right? I think that that's where the message kind of gets convoluted and lost when you don't know where the resource is, and it's not, you know, multiple resources versus just that like one where it's all in one place.
Yeah, I appreciate all of that. My hope and this is what I wish for like every company, I wish that each time you had a learning moment where you're like, oh, I wish we could capture those in the use cases. And, you know, like that's my dream as a, you know, learning and development guy. Like that's my dream, is the aha moments to somehow capture all of those and bottle them so that we can help people. Okay, this is where we're 45 minutes in with kind of you all sharing your perspectives and, you know, us responding to a few questions. I really appreciate wait, we're gonna hit with one. How do you feel about cannabis course and degree offered places like ISU? Okay, so kind of open access content. You know what I think this is going to do? So William and also John, I think your questions get to offer an opportunity for Gronin to do a little follow-up, for me to do some follow-up in here, which is to just put together a list of other resources out there, which is kind of what I'm hearing, like what are some good resources? So that seems like a fair follow-up to expect from us when we send out some posts. I really want to thank each of you for sharing your time, your expertise, your unique perspectives on this. And Divina, if everybody could clap, I would give you a big shout out, because Divina joined us on a day off. So her interest in supporting the industry's growth is real and genuine. And thank you all. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you.